You helped a family silently, truly admirable. Clara, a kind-hearted mother, gave what little food she had left to help the struggling Boleyn family. She didn't expect anything in return, simply wanting to share what little she had to help them get through. But when an unexpected gift arrived, a check for $5,000, Clara's life was about to change in ways she never anticipated. The kindness Clara had sowed had returned to her, and the person who helped her was someone she never would have expected. Welcome back, everyone, to Seeds of Goodness. Today, I have another heartfelt story to share with you. Let's begin. The early spring wind swept through Emmett, Idaho, in March 2023, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth and budding lilacs down the quiet streets of Pine Grove Lane. Clara Evans pulled her beat-up hatchback into the driveway of her small duplex, the engine sputtering as she cut it off. At 38, Clara was a woman shaped by resilience, her auburn hair tied back in a messy bun, her hazel eyes sharp with a kindness honed from years of giving more than she had. A single mother and part-time baker at Millie's Cafe downtown, she'd scraped by since her own divorce 5 years earlier, raising her 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, on a shoestring budget. Her hands, dusted with flour even now, bore the faint scars of oven burns, a testament to late nights turning dough into sustenance. Inside, the duplex hummed with the warmth of a modest life. Sophie sprawled on the couch with a math book, her brown curls spilling over a cushion, the radio playing soft country tunes. Clara dropped her keys on the counter, the day's weariness settling into her bones. She'd clocked an extra shift at Millie's, the cafe's owner, Millie Tanner, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp, pushing her to cover the breakfast rush. The tips were meager, but they'd cover the electric bill due tomorrow. As she preheated the oven for a frozen pizza, Sophie glanced up. "Mrs. Boleyn's light's been off all week," she said, nodding toward the house next door. "Think they're okay?" Clara paused, her hand on the oven door, and followed Sophie's gaze out the window. The Boleyn house, a sagging craftsman with chipped blue paint, stood dark against the twilight, its porch empty where Jamie, a lanky 15-year-old with a shy smile, usually sat sketching. Clara knew the family through small-town osmosis. Laura Boleyn, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, and her son Jamie, navigating a messy divorce from Laura's husband, Mark, a trucker who'd left them high and dry 3 months ago. Whispers at Millie's painted a grim picture. No alimony yet, bills piling up, Laura scrambling for work with no luck. "They're struggling," Clara said, her voice low. "Divorce hits hard. Takes everything you've got." Sophie frowned, closing her book. "Can we help? Like food or something?" Clara smiled faintly, ruffling Sophie's hair. "You're a good kid. We'll see what we can do." That night, as Sophie slept, Clara sat at her kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea cooling beside her. The Boleyn's dark windows gnawed at her, memories of her own divorce surfacing like ghosts. 5 years ago, she'd been Laura, alone, broke, terrified, stretching stale bread and canned soup to feed Sophie while creditors called. A neighbor, old Mrs. Grayson, had slipped loaves of bread under her door back then, a silent lifeline that kept them afloat until Clara landed the cafe gig. She'd never thanked her. Mrs. Grayson passed before she could, but the lesson stuck. Kindness could bridge the gap when words failed. By morning, March 15th, Clara made up her mind. She woke early, the sky still gray, and raided her pantry. Canned beans, a bag of rice, a loaf of day-old bread from Millie's, a jar of peanut butter Sophie hadn't touched. It wasn't much, but it was something. She packed it into a cardboard box, scribbling "For you" on a scrap of paper, and slipped out before Sophie stirred. The Boleyn porch creaked under her boots as she set the box by the door, the wind biting her cheeks as she darted back home, heart pounding with a mix of nerves and resolve. The next day she watched from her window. Laura, her blonde hair limp and her eyes hollow, stepped out, froze at the sight of the box, then carried it inside, glancing around with a puzzled frown. Clara exhaled, a small victory settling in her chest. She didn't stop. Every few mornings, she left another box, pasta, apples from the cafe's overstock, a can of soup. Sophie caught on by week 2, whispering, "You're like a food fairy," as she helped pack oatmeal and raisins one dawn. Clara just smiled, the routine a quiet anchor in her stretched thin days. Weeks blurred into routine. Clara's deliveries became a lifeline as Laura's divorce dragged on, the house staying dark but for flickers of candlelight. At Millie's, gossip swirled. Mark had vanished, the lawyer fees bled Laura dry, no job prospects in sight. Clara overheard Jamie's voice at the cafe one day, thin and strained, ordering a single coffee for his mom with coins scraped from couch cushions. "She's trying," he told Millie, who slipped him a free muffin with a wink. Clara's throat tightened. She knew that desperation, the weight of a parent's worry on a kid's shoulders. One evening, late March, Clara sat with Sophie over a meager supper of mac and cheese, the radio crooning Patsy Cline. "Think they know it's us?" Sophie asked, twirling her fork. "Doubt it," Clara said, sipping water. "Don't matter who, just matters they're eating." Sophie nodded, her young face serious. "You're good at this, Mom. Helping." Clara's eyes stung, pride and fatigue warring inside her. "Learned from someone who helped me once," she said, her voice soft. "Keeps us going, doesn't it?" Outside, the Boleyn house stood silent, but Clara pictured Laura and Jamie inside, maybe cracking the peanut butter, boiling the rice, finding a moment's relief. She didn't know how long she could keep it up. Her own budget creaked under the strain, but she'd stretch it as far as it'd go. The spring wind howled on, carrying whispers of struggle and survival, and Clara settled into her role as the unseen hand, unaware that her quiet kindness was planting seeds for a surprise she'd never see coming. April 2023 crept into Emmett, Idaho, with a hesitant warmth, the lilacs along Pine Grove Lane blooming in soft purples as the days lengthened. Clara Evans woke before dawn each morning, her small duplex quiet save for the soft snores of her 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, drifting from the couch where she'd fallen asleep with her math book. Clara's auburn hair hung loose as she moved silently through the kitchen, her hazel eyes bleary but resolute. The routine had solidified over weeks. Every few days, she'd pack a cardboard box with whatever she could spare, a bag of potatoes from Millie's cafe overstock, a can of tuna, a loaf of bread nearing its sell-by date. Her hands, still dusted with flour from late shifts, trembled slightly as she scribbled, "For you," on a scrap of paper, the ink smudging under her thumb. She'd slip out into the gray light, leaving the box on the Boleyn porch next door, her heart thudding with a mix of fear and purpose as she darted back unseen. The Boleyn house, a sagging craftsman with peeling blue paint, remained a shadow of its former self, its windows dark save for the occasional flicker of a candle or flashlight. Laura Boleyn, a fragile figure in her late 30s with limp blonde hair and hollow cheeks, had become a ghost in the neighborhood since her husband, Mark, walked out 3 months ago. Her son, Jamie, a lanky 15-year-old with a mop of brown hair and a sketchbook always tucked under his arm, carried the weight of their struggle in his slumped shoulders. Clara watched from her window each time Laura retrieved a box, her puzzled glances around the empty street, a silent question Clara never answered. The food vanished inside, and Clara took that as victory, small, unspoken, but real. But at Millie's cafe, where Clara baked muffins and flipped pancakes for the breakfast crowd, the town's gossip swirled like steam from the coffee pots. Millie Tanner, the wiry owner with a voice rasped by years of cigarettes, leaned on the counter one morning, her sharp eyes glinting. "Heard Laura Boleyn's still jobless," she said, pouring a refill for Tom Grayson, a grizzled farmer nursing his 3rd cup. "Mark's gone AWOL. No alimony, no nothing. Poor woman's living on fumes." Tom grunted, stirring sugar into his mug. "Saw the kid, Jamie, digging for change here yesterday. Just a coffee for his mom. Gave him a donut on the house." Clara's throat tightened as she kneaded dough behind the counter, her hands pausing mid-motion. She'd seen Jamie, too, his thin frame hunched over a single cup, counting nickels like they were gold. She kept her deliveries secret, even from Millie, but the weight of their need pressed harder each day. Her own budget strained, Sophie's school shoes were splitting, the rent check loomed, but she stretched every dime, skipping her own lunches to save scraps for the Boleyns. Sophie, sharp as ever, became Clara's quiet partner. One rainy April evening, as they packed a box with oatmeal and a jar of applesauce, she looked up, her brown curls damp from helping with dishes. "Think they're eating okay now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "Hope so," Clara said, taping the box shut. "Can't fix everything, but it's something." Sophie nodded, her young face serious. "You're like Mrs. Grayson, Mom. Remember her bread?" Clara's eyes stung. Memories of those dark days 5 years ago flooding back. Mrs. Grayson's silent loaves, a lifeline when she'd had nothing. "Yeah," she said, her voice thick. "Keeps the wheel turning, doesn't it?" The deliveries continued into May, the boxes growing heavier as Clara's tips piled up. A bag of carrots, a block of cheese Millie let her take from the cafe fridge, a packet of pasta Sophie donated from their pantry. Laura's divorce dragged on, whispers at Millie's hinting at legal fees bleeding her dry, Mark's absence a void no court could fill. One dawn, Clara lingered too long. Laura stepped out as the box hit the porch, her tired eyes locking with Clara's across the yard. Clara froze, breath caught, but Laura just nodded, a faint, weary smile tugging her lips before she took the box inside. Clara exhaled, relief and guilt warring in her chest. She hadn't wanted credit, just results. By June, a shift rippled through Pine Grove Lane. Clara spotted a for sale sign on the Boleyn lawn one morning, its stark red letters a jolt against the faded paint. At Millie's, Tom confirmed it over coffee. "Laura got a job, clerical gig at the feed store," he said, tipping his hat. "Moving to a cheaper place across town. Guess they're pulling through." Clara's heart lifted, a quiet triumph settling in. That night, she baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, Sophie's idea, and left them as a final box, the note reading, "Congrats." The next day, the Boleyn porch was empty, the house silent as movers hauled out furniture. Clara watched from her window, Sophie at her side, a bittersweet ache in her chest. "Think they'll be okay now?" Sophie asked, her voice soft. "Looks like it," Clara said, squeezing her shoulder. "Sometimes you just need a hand to get started." Life pressed on. Clara's shifts at Millie's stretched long. Sophie aced her math test. The duplex hummed with their small victories. The Boleyns faded from view, their new place a mystery across Emmett's sprawl. Clara's boxes stopped, her pantry easing as she rebuilt her own reserves, but the memory lingered. Laura's nod, Jamie's thin frame, the flicker of light in a dark house. She didn't expect thanks. The silence was enough, proof her food had bridged a gap when words couldn't. One humid June evening, Clara sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea, the crickets chirping as Sophie sketched beside her. The Boleyn house stood vacant now, its windows blank, but Clara felt its echo, a lifeline woven from scraps, a debt repaid from her own past. She didn't know who'd watched her deliveries, who'd seen her stretch herself thin, but the act had settled into her bones, a quiet rhythm of giving she couldn't shake. The summer stretched ahead, heavy with heat and possibility, and Clara leaned back, unaware that her kindness had planted seeds beyond Pine Grove Lane, seeds waiting to bloom into a surprise she'd never see coming. The summer heat pressed down on Emmett, Idaho in late June 2023, the air thick with the hum of cicadas and the faint sweetness of overripe cherries from the orchards lining Pine Grove Lane. Clara Evans sat on the sagging steps of her duplex porch, a glass of lukewarm lemonade sweating in her hand, her auburn hair sticking to her neck in the stifling dusk. At 38, her hazel eyes carried a quiet fatigue, softened by the resilience that had carried her and her 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, through years of lean days. The Boleyn house next door stood vacant now, its for sale sign swaying in the breeze, a silent testament to Laura and Jamie's departure to a cheaper rental across town. Clara's deliveries, those clandestine boxes of food, had stopped weeks ago, their absence leaving a hollow space in her routine, though relief mingled with it. Laura had a job now, A clerical position at the feed store and whispers at Millie's cafe confirmed they were scraping by. Clara's small act had bridged a gap, and that was enough. Inside, Sophie sprawled across the couch, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of a lilac bush, her brown curls fanned out on a cushion. The radio played a soft ballad, its notes drifting through the open window as Clara sipped her drink, the ice long melted. Her shifts at Millie's stretched longer now. Millie Tanner, the cafe's gruff owner, leaned on her for extra hours as summer tourists trickled in. But the tips padded their thin budget. Sophie's new school shoes sat by the door, a victory won from weeks of skipped coffees, and the electric bill was paid, though the rent loomed like a shadow on the horizon. Clara leaned back, the porch step creaking, and let the day's weight settle. A baker's life, a mother's life, threaded with the quiet pride of giving when she had little to spare. July 1st dawned sticky and bright, the sun clawing through the duplex's thin curtains as Clara shuffled to the kitchen, starting coffee before Sophie woke. She stepped outside to grab the mail, a habit born from dread of late notices, and froze. There, on the porch, sat a plain brown envelope, no stamp, no address, just Clara Evans, scrawled in neat black ink. Her heart thudded as she picked it up, its weight heavier than a bill or flyer. She glanced around. Pine Grove Lane slept under the morning haze, no sign of a deliverer, then tore it open, her fingers trembling. Inside was a check, $5,000, made out to her, signed with an illegible flourish, and a typed note, "For the food you gave when no one asked. You're not alone either." No name, no clue, just those words and the staggering sum. Clara's breath caught, her knees buckling as she sank onto the steps, the check fluttering in her grip. $5,000, enough to fix the car's rattling engine, pay rent for months, buy Sophie a proper desk for her sketches. Her mind raced. Someone knew. Someone had seen her creeping to the Boleyn porch, her secret boxes of rice and soup. But who? Sophie stumbled out, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" Clara handed her the note, voice shaking. "Look at this, Soph. Someone left us this." Sophie's eyes widened, scanning the check. $5,000? Who'd do that? "No idea," Clara said, her throat tight. "Says it's for the food, for the Boleyns." Sophie grinned, plopping beside her. "You're a hero, Mom. Like a secret agent, now you're getting paid." Clara laughed, a shaky sound, but the mystery gnawed at her. She hid the envelope in a drawer, swearing Sophie to silence. No sense stirring gossip at Millie's yet. That day, she baked with a distracted hum, her mind spinning through suspects. Laura, maybe, though she'd barely scraped by herself. Millie, unlikely with her tight fists. Tom Grayson, the farmer who'd pitied Jamie, but why this much? The check felt like a phantom, a gift too big for her small hands. Weeks later, July 20th, Clara cashed it, the bank teller's raised eyebrow ignored as the money hit her account. She fixed the car, paid 3 months' rent, and bought Sophie a sturdy oak desk from a thrift shop, its drawers perfect for her pencils. The rest she saved, a cushion against the lean days she knew too well. Life eased. Sophie sketched late into the nights. Clara smiled more at Millie's. The duplex felt less like a trap. But the donor stayed a shadow, their silence louder than the gift. One humid evening, Clara sat at Millie's after closing, wiping counters as Millie counted the till. Tom Grayson lingered over his coffee, his grizzled face thoughtful. "Heard Laura Boleyn settled," he said, stirring sugar. "Job steady, kids back in school. Guess those food boxes worked." Clara froze, her rag mid-swipe, but Millie snorted. "Yeah, some angel kept 'em fed. Small towns, always someone watching." Tom's eyes flicked to Clara, a faint smile tugging his lips, but he said nothing, sipping his drink. She busied herself, heart pounding. Did he know? Had he seen her dawn runs? She shook it off, the mystery donor too big for a farmer's wallet. But his look lingered in her mind. August rolled in, the heat breaking with a soft rain as Clara and Sophie walked home from the library, Sophie clutching a new sketchbook. A pickup slowed beside them, Tom tipping his hat. Need a lift? He asked, his voice casual. Sure, Clara said, climbing in with Sophie. The cab smelled of hay and oil, Tom's hands steady on the wheel. Nice desk Sophie's got, he said, glancing back. Heard you fixed the car, too. Good summer? Clara nodded, wary. Yeah, unexpected help came our way. Tom grunted, his smile cryptic. Happens sometimes. Folks pay it back quiet-like. He dropped them off, driving into the dusk, and Clara stood on her porch, the pieces clicking. She never asked. Tom never told. But the suspicion settled. He'd watched, maybe followed her one dawn, his farmer's thrift stretched to honor her giving. The $5,000 felt like his wife's inheritance, a secret nod to Mrs. Grayson's bread years ago. Clara kept it quiet, but the next week she baked extra muffins, leaving them at Millie's with a note. For Tom. The chain rolled on. Sophie gifted a sketch to a classmate, Millie fed a hungry trucker, Emmett buzzed with small kindnesses. Clara's boxes had fed more than the Boleyns. They'd sparked a mystery gift that lifted her, rippling through a town that never forgot.